My name's Owen Atkin. I'm an editor for New Phytologist. I've been an editor since 2007. I'm currently the head of the Division of Plant Sciences at the Australian National University in Canberra, and I've been there for 9 years. Prior to being at the ANU, I was in the UK for 9 years working at the University of York, and that was around the time that I started being an editor. I think it was back in 2007 when I was at the University of York. I was there for 9 years. And prior to starting as a faculty member at York, I'd postdoc for 5 years. Some of those years were in Canberra, 2 years were in the Netherlands, and then going even back further, 5 years in Canada as a PhD student at the University of Toronto. And then I'd originated in Australia as an undergrad and so on. My interests in terms of plant science, I'm not really sure where it started. I know that as a kid I really enjoyed spending time with my grandfather when he was a gardener. We'd visit their house and he'd have a garden outside, and I'd enjoy digging soil and so on with him, and that led to me when I was a teenager having my own vegetable garden and watching plants grow and so on. I've never been very good at it, to be honest, still aren't. But we still have a vegetable garden, and when I was in the University of York we had an allotment there. It's an enormous space of land for growing plants, so I always enjoyed that aspect of life, and plants sort of had a connection. And the other one was in terms of learning to bushwalk and cross-country ski and being outdoors and so on, and that led to a fascination with how plants actually survive under really stressful conditions. And I remember as an honours student doing a project on plants in alpine areas in Australia, fascinated by the fact that a plant called Caltha interloba could flower under the snow, and it had freezing water flowing over the top of it, and it was capable of metabolizing under those sort of conditions. And that led to me then wanting to then pursue more plant science subjects, and it's one of the reasons why I went to Canada to do a PhD over there, because I wanted to work on Arctic plants and look at how they survived under their environmental conditions. So now we look at plants growing in Arctic through to tropical biomes, so we're looking at sort of predominantly temperature responses of plants in a whole range of habitats. In terms of hot topics in the field, in terms of things that interest me, one of the major issues is the need to understand what regulates variations in respiratory fluxes in plants. We know a lot about photosynthetic processes in plants. There's been a lot of learning over the last 50, 60 years in terms of the regulation of metabolism in plants. From a photosynthetic perspective, we still lack that sort of understanding, that process-based understanding for respiration. Why is it that some species respire much faster than others? We really have a very poor feel for that. And why is it that environmental conditions can dramatically alter fluxes? What are the regulatory control factors which actually dictate that? So for us, that's a major question which we're trying to answer. In that context, it's then also the way in which we then represent those respiratory processes in large-scale models. That remains a big objective for us, is trying to actually get respiratory processes better represented in Earth system models so we can better predict future climate processes. Building on that, or how does my research benefit society? Building on sort of the issue of how respiration is represented in Earth system models, if we are to predict how hot the world will be in 50 to 100 years' time, you need to understand carbon flows from plants through to the atmosphere. And then one of the biggest the unknowns there is the way in which respiration responds to temperature and how it differs across different spatial and temporal gradients and so on. So by getting a better handle on the respiratory processes, we'll be able to improve those Earth system models. That'll give policymakers a better idea of how much change there will be in the climate, which has its own social impacts. The other one is that if we are to improve crop productivity, we need to enhance the carbon use efficiency of plants. And there is a lot of effort going on at the moment in crops such as wheat and rice about trying to search for genotypes that actually have improved carbon use efficiency, and then in that case, better understanding the respiratory metabolism will be a major component of that. In terms of role models, I've had several. I've worked on multiple continents and universities and so on, and I've got a number of very special people. I'm not going to name who they are, but the types of individuals they have usually been very generous individuals, ones that have cared about the people that work with them and work for them and so on, and also those that have enjoyed doing things that help benefit the collective, the people, the sort of groups of people that they work with. So for me, they're the role models in terms of how you behave with other people, how you relate to them, and I've been very lucky to have several of those. Favourite thing about my job? I never get bored. So I think that's probably the key thing. We enjoy what we do. We're fascinated by the sort of questions we're asking. We're paid to do it, so it's pretty good. And it's a diverse job, so the job changes. You start off as a student and a postdoc focusing on a small number of things. You end up being in a lab leader role and a broader leadership role, and so you have a whole range of areas that you have to deal with, so it's diverse and so on. And a major part of our job is new phytologist. That's every week we're always dealing with some aspect of the journal's work, and that's a lot of fun. You get exposed to an incredible breadth of science through your role as an editor. And again, you feel like you're doing something which is useful because it's a non-profit society that underpins it. You're doing things that help benefiting science broadly. In terms of what my least favourite thing would be, it would be in the area of the fact that you're so short on time that you're struggling sometimes to get that right balance between doing the job that you really enjoy doing and then sort of making sure that you find time for doing other things, which is good for mental health, I think, is actually finding that downtime. Sometimes that's a bit of a struggle, and it's probably the biggest struggle that a lot of academics have. I think for early career researchers, the advice I would give would be that do it because you're passionate about it, that you really enjoy what you're doing. If you're not really enjoying it, then it's probably maybe a good idea to look for something else. But if it is something you really enjoy, that's a plus, and pursue that, but also have some flexibility about how you do that. That's a second thing, I think, and that might mean moving around, right? It's sometimes the jobs can be found, but you've actually got to have that flexibility about where it is that you live. That can be a challenge depending on life circumstances, but having that element of flexibility built in can help somewhat. The last thing would be, if you don't end up being an academic, that's not failure. You're getting a whole range of skills that you obtain through the training as a graduate student and so on, which are fantastic transferable skills for a whole range of other jobs, and that you'll end up doing really important things, knowing about science in other contexts. So don't see that as failure if you don't end up having an academic position. Where would I see myself in 5 years' time? I really don't know. I could be doing much of the same thing in terms of doing research and running a lab and so on. I've become head of my department or division or whatever. I don't know what that will entail over the next 5 years, so I'm a little uncertain on that front. I just hope that I'm doing things that I enjoy, as I am at the moment. What other passions do I have? I think my number one would be that I love cross-country skiing. It was a major factor for why I ended up getting into plant biology because of the issues of plants growing under snow and so on. And it's why I chose to do my PhD in Canada. It's one of the reasons I love living in Canberra, because we've only got 2.5 hours to go skiing from where we are. And I enjoy running and gardening. So there'll be the other two that I like.